Hey guys, tonight we're diving straight into silk-bound corsets, stolen glances and an entire mountain of expectations. You're opening your eyes in a cramped Victorian bed, sunlight just beginning to filter through the lace curtains. It's your wedding day, but not in the way you've been dreaming since you were a child, sketching hearts on foggy windows. Your hands are trembling slightly, but not from love. More like the nerves you get when you're signing a contract you didn't review, because in many ways that's exactly what you're doing. Victorian marriages aren't built on passion. They're arranged with gloves on, quite literally. Courtship here is a calculated dance, a rehearsed show under the watchful gaze of mothers, aunts and family lawyers. You've had maybe 3 moments truly private with the man you're marrying today. None of them included a conversation longer than discussing weather or his preferred breed of hunting dog. He once praised your embroidery. That's the emotional foundation you're about to legally bind your future with. There's no backing out. The invitations have been engraved. Your father has negotiated the dowry, which included a mahogany cabinet, 3 mirror sets, and some bonds you've never laid eyes on. And your mother spent 3 weeks training you on how to appear both modest and appealing, while carefully reminding you not to seem eager. Eagerness is unladylike. Now your maid is cinching the corset. She pulls and you exhale, but it's never enough. You'll need to spend your wedding day smiling in something that feels like a rib cage made of iron. Then it's into the gown. Cream satin, hand-stitched with a modest neckline. White, naturally, though until recently brides wore anything festive. Queen Victoria changed that, appearing in ivory lace for her own wedding in 1840, and now every social climber imitates her. As you're finally prepared, your mother hands you a blue ribbon for your garter. Something borrowed, something blue, something old, something new, and whispers a sentence so cutting it slices the air. Remember, darling, you're not just marrying a man, you're marrying into a future. Outside, a carriage waits. Inside, a minister recites the vows to love, honour and obey. That last word catches in your throat like a dry cracker. Obey isn't a symbolic touch, it's the law. You're entering what legal scholars called coverture. From this moment on, your legal identity disappears into your husband's. You can't sign contracts, you can't own property. You are, in legal terms, femme covert, a covered woman. Not covered like protected, covered like erased. After the ceremony, there's cake and dancing and whispers of your good match. He kisses your cheek. You smell gin. He gives a toast about domestic bliss and duty. You stare at your champagne and wonder if duty will always taste like dryness in your mouth. Later, when the guests depart and the carriage pulls away, you're finally alone with your husband. In theory, this is when the marriage becomes real. There's an awkward moment when neither of you know whether to discuss furniture or kiss. In some cases, the groom might be drunk, in others, terrified. And then there are the ones who are simply impatient. No one prepared you for this. Victorian etiquette books often described a woman's wifely duty as silent, enduring and sacred. They never described what to expect, just what to accept. You lie in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, your corset finally removed, but the pressure somehow worse. The vows have been spoken, the paperwork filed. You're now someone's wife, and no one asked you whether you wanted to be. The room is dim and still, save for the crackle of coal in the fireplace and the distant sound of carriage wheels fading into the London fog. Your new husband is already asleep, or at least pretending to be. You lie on your back, tracing invisible patterns on the canopy above with your eyes. Your body aches in unfamiliar ways, some from the day's exertion, some from things you don't have the language to name yet. You think about the guests, the well-wishers, the smirking cousins who whispered about the wedding night as though it were a sporting event. One had even winked at you. And all the women who squeezed your hands just a little too firmly, as if passing you a secret message between the congratulations. In Victorian society, what happened behind the bedroom door was everyone's business, but never to be discussed. Your body, once your own, is now shared property. Not metaphorically, legally. The famous jurist William Blackstone once wrote that by marriage the husband and wife become one person in the law, and that person is the husband in practice. That means if your husband wanted to take your money, your jewellery, even your letters, he could. If he hit you, well, that was a domestic matter, not for courtrooms. Unless, of course, you bled publicly. You think of your sister, married off the year before. She laughs less now, writes letters about tea and weather and troubles with the staff, but never about the way she looks thinner every time you visit. You remember when she confided only once that her husband thought her too emotional and had suggested she be examined by a physician. A week later she was prescribed bed rest and a mercury tonic. The fire dims, the room darkens. You pull the sheets tighter, unsure whether it's from cold or dread. Your husband stirs, mumbles something about the solicitor. He turns away from you in bed, and so begins the quiet, aching strangeness of Victorian marriage. Two people bound together by law, economy and reputation, sometimes love but often not, sharing a life yet separated by oceans of expectation. For you, this isn't the beginning of romance, it's the beginning of performance. A lifelong play in which your lines have already been written for you. You remember hearing about a bride who fainted on her wedding night, not from passion, but because no one had explained what would happen. Not her mother, not her governess, not her pastor. The morning after, she asked her maid if she was still pure. The maid simply nodded and said, "You're a wife now." You stare out the window. Somewhere beyond the gaslight, haze and rooftop silhouettes, you imagine other women in other beds having the same thoughts, wondering the same things, praying for kindness, or at the very least, for time to pass. Later that night, you dream of walking through a garden in a dress made of paper. Every step tears a little more. You try to hold the pieces together, but the wind keeps rising. When you wake, it's still dark, but a new day is coming, the first full day of your marriage. You sit up slowly, feeling older than you were yesterday. Your maid will knock soon, your husband will go to his office, and you, well, you'll learn what it means to be a Victorian wife, one silent breakfast at a time. The breakfast room smells of boiled eggs and burnt toast, and the butter is slightly too warm, sliding off the silver tray like it's trying to escape. You sit at one end of the long mahogany table, your husband at the other, as if intimacy were measured in feet. He clears his throat between mouthfuls, flips through the newspaper and mutters something about the state of the colonies. You nod politely. He doesn't look up. This is your first full day as a married woman, and you're already being trained in the subtle art of silence. There's a new ring on your finger, and a new title before your name misses. You try it on in your mind, like a costume. It doesn't quite fit yet. Your husband rises before you've finished your tea. "Letters to dictate," he says, not unkindly, and disappears into the study. The door clicks shut, and with it the illusion of companionship. You're left alone, with the clink of china, the ticking clock, and the maid who hovers just close enough to refill your cup, but never your thoughts. You'd hoped, perhaps foolishly, that today would bring conversation, a plan for the house, a shared walk, a moment that felt like something. But instead you're discovering that Victorian marriage isn't built on togetherness. It's built on distance, on roles, on ritual. You've inherited not just a husband, but an entire household. A small army of servants, most of whom have been here longer than you, and none of whom look pleased about the new mistress. There's the housekeeper, whose eyebrow lifts each time you make a request. The cook, who's already decided you eat like a sparrow. And the scullery maid, who stares at your dresses with a hunger that has nothing to do with food. But worst of all is your new mother-in-law. She does not live here permanently, but she might as well. Her hat sits in the front hall like a warning sign. She arrives unannounced, glides in without knocking, and examines the silverware, as if looking for evidence of your unworthiness. "Oh, I always thought that wallpaper was too cheerful for a proper dining room," she says casually one afternoon before launching into a story about how her wedding breakfast had included deviled kidneys and fresh marmalade. "But times do change," she adds, glancing at your plate. "Some girls prefer simpler things." Now you smile, of course, because you must. Marriage in Victorian society isn't about you and your husband. It's about the entire social ecosystem you're now a part of. You've married into a name, a reputation, a network of expectations, and with that comes scrutiny from every angle. Family, servants, neighbours, acquaintances you haven't even met yet. Dowries are discussed in hushed tones, but everyone knows their value. Yours was decent, not grand, not scandalous, just enough to get you into this house at the cost of becoming part of the furniture. You are, in essence, an asset acquired through a legal, financial and social exchange. Your father provided the goods, your mother ensured they were well packaged, and your husband, for all his politeness, has entered into a business arrangement. The contract is signed, the goods are delivered. Now it's time to manage the estate. Later, when you retreat to your private sitting room, you find a note waiting on your writing desk. It's from your husband. Short, punctuated dinner with the Fairfaxes tonight. Black dress preferred. You run your finger across the words and feel something cold settle in your stomach. You were hoping for looking forward to seeing you, or even just yours. But no, this isn't romance. This is scheduling. You glance at the black dress hanging in your wardrobe, then at your reflection, and you begin to understand what it means to become a Victorian wife, visible in society, invisible in the home. That evening you wear the black dress. It fits perfectly, too perfectly, as if it were stitched not for comfort but for containment. The neckline is modest, the sleeves tight. A string of pearls rests at your throat like a leash made elegant. You descend the stairs, with the grace you've been taught, conscious of every step, every angle, every expression. Your husband waits. At the bottom, he nods his approval. That's the most affection you'll receive all night. The Fairfax drawing room is a box of chattering porcelain figures. Ladies with stiff curls and sharper smiles. Men with sideburns and brandy glasses, all trading stories about politics, property and the folly of continental manners. You sit beside your husband, as if placed there by a chess master. Occasionally he gestures in your direction. "My wife enjoyed the performance, didn't you, dear?" And you smile on cue. Your job is not to participate, it's to reflect. Well, you learn quickly in this world. Women are ornamental, to be admired, yes, but not heard, especially not on matters of consequence. You attempt once to offer an opinion on the reform bill, having read about it in last week's Times, and the conversation stalls as if you've dropped a teacup. The hostess recovers gracefully by asking about your embroidery. Back home, you unpin your hair with slow fingers, your scalp aching from the weight of perfection. You wonder how many nights like this there will be, how many times you'll be wheeled out like the good set of china only to be polished, displayed and quietly returned to the cabinet. In quieter moments, you think about the value you were assigned. Not metaphorically, literally. During marriage negotiations, your dowry would have been itemised like an inventory sheet. $200 in cash, 2 acres of leased land, 6 silver candelabra, and possibly a piano. Your husband brought to the union a title, a townhouse and family connections. In some cases, the man's wealth outweighed the woman's. In others, the opposite was true, and those women quickly found themselves controlled in proportion to their contribution. Dowries weren't just about money. They were a form of insurance. If you died childless, your dowry often returned to your family. If you bore a son, it remained with your husband. If your husband died early and kindly included you in his will, you might keep some of it, but mostly it vanished into his estate. You could sign the cheque, but never keep the pen. And for the daughters of less wealthy families, sometimes the dowry was so modest that it was supplemented with other assets like beauty or breeding or a compliant nature. You've heard rumours of fathers who offered rare books, prized dogs, or even the promise of future business favours. To sweeten the deal, one woman's uncle reportedly negotiated her marriage using 3 crates of brandy and a signed cricket bat. These transactions happen behind the scenes, of course, but you feel them in every interaction, at every dinner, in every glance that lingers a little too long on your necklace instead of your face. You're beginning to understand that Victorian marriage isn't just a union. It's a ledger, a calculated merging of 2 financial lives wrapped in lace and sealed with public performance. The next morning, when your husband hands you a note about the week's social visits, you nod and thank him. But inside, you're already practicing your own arithmetic. How much of yourself you've spent and how much you can afford to keep. The next Sunday arrives with church bells and cold air. You dress in dark wool lace gloves buttoned at the wrist and a hat wide enough to cast polite shadows over your expressions. Today is about respectability, posture, the appearance of unity. You and your husband walk side by side, but not arm in arm. That kind of closeness would be improper before God, or at least before the neighbours. Inside the chapel, the preacher's voice echoes off stone, rising toward the rafters like smoke. He reads aloud from the Book of Common Prayer, the same words you mouthed during your wedding, only now sitting on a hard wooden pew beside a man who hasn't asked you a personal question in 4 days. The words sound different. To have and to hold, to love, honour and obey. There it is again. Obey. You glance sideways. Your husband's expression is neutral. Perhaps it always is. You try to recall if you've ever seen him surprised or afraid or silly. But no, Victorian men are trained to manage expressions the way they manage ledgers, strictly without overexposure. After service, you linger in the vestibule as polite conversation buzzes around you. Mrs. Wickham comments on the frost. Reverend Ellis asks after your health. Another lady touches your elbow and says, "Isn't marriage the most rewarding form of discipline?" You nod, but you're not sure which word is more chilling, rewarding or discipline. You've begun to notice something. No one talks about love, not really, not outside of novels. Instead, they talk about duty, fidelity, social standing, an advantageous match. If affection comes up, it's framed as luck. They've grown fond of each other. Someone whispers about the Miltons as if fondness were a rash they caught after the ceremony. You once overheard a woman at a dinner party say, "Romance ends where the veil begins." She said it with a laugh, but you remember the way her eyes didn't follow. The truth is, Victorian vows are more contract than covenant in the eyes of the law. Marriage grants the man full control over his wife's body and property. But for women, there is no escape clause, no grounds for divorce, unless adultery is paired with additional cruelty. He must not only betray you, but humiliate or harm you as well. Even then, divorce requires a public trial, and public trials mean scandal, and scandal means ruin. That's why most women endure silently, with grace if they can muster it. You've read somewhere that even Queen Victoria herself described women as weak and helpless in relation to men, that the domestic sphere is their proper place. And when the Queen thinks that way, well, what hope do you have? But, inside your own mind, you begin to ask questions. Not aloud, of course, not yet. But they start to flicker at the edges of your thoughts like candle flames. What would happen if I didn't obey? What would happen if I wrote my own vows? One day, it was in the quiet of your dressing room. You begin a small rebellion, a notebook hidden behind your sewing basket. On the first page, you write to question, to remember, and to survive. No one sees it, no one knows, but for the first time since your wedding day, the ink feels like it belongs to you. The notebook becomes your secret cathedral. You fill its pages slowly in the space between obligations, between embroidery lessons and supper plans and the daily charade of smiling when your husband recounts the parliamentary debates over port. You don't write poetry or confessions. You write observations, fragments, a quiet rebellion in cursive. Today he asked whether I needed a new bonnet. He has never asked what I think about the way he talks to the maid. Mrs. Penfield's husband keeps her on a schedule, like a train line. He times her walks. She smiles like the clock is always ticking. You never intended to become a recorder of marital anthropology, but here you are documenting a world of well-mannered prisons. The more you notice, the more you understand. Marriage isn't just about the man and the woman, it's about the performance, the image, the myth of harmonious domesticity. In town, people whisper admiringly about the Rutherford marriage. They say your husband is dependable, respectable, that you're lucky. You nod and thank them. They don't see the way he closes the study door behind him every night, or how he compliments your dress the same way he praises the roast beef. Pleasant, sufficient, but with no curiosity about the recipe. You wonder what would happen if you stopped pretending. If one morning you looked across the breakfast table and said, "I'm not happy," the idea alone feels scandalous. Victorian culture doesn't allow space for marital dissatisfaction, at least not from women. Unhappiness is seen as ingratitude. Your husband provides, doesn't he? The bills are paid, the staff is managed. What else could you possibly want? But you know better now. You've seen the quiet faces of other wives at society luncheons, the flicker of something behind their eyes when their husbands talk over them. You've noticed the way some women ask about books or music in the vaguest terms, as if testing whether such interests are allowed. You've also heard of wives who turned to the bottle or to laudanum or to compulsive sewing that bordered on madness. Anything to fill the silence. And then there's the legal trap. If you were to leave him, really leave, what happens? You have no rights to your own money. You cannot claim the house. If children come, they will belong to him, not you. Until 1839, a father could take children from their mother after separation without explanation. Even after the Custody of Infants Act, the courts favoured men, always men. Some women, desperate beyond desperation, staged affairs not for pleasure but for evidence, because under Victorian law, adultery was the only real ticket to legal separation. But even then, the woman would bear the disgrace. A stained reputation whispers, no second chances. One case you've read about haunts you. A woman named Caroline Norton. She was clever, well-connected, a writer. When she separated from her abusive husband, he took her children and barred her from earning money through her own writing. She had no legal recourse because married women had no legal identity. Caroline spent years fighting for reform, not just for herself, but for the women she knew were suffering in silence. And she almost succeeded. Almost. You think of her often when you write in your notebook. One evening your husband walks into the drawing room while you're scribbling. You close the notebook too quickly. He raises an eyebrow. Still keeping that diary? You nod, your throat dry. Good. Helps the nerves, I suppose. He walks away without asking what's inside. And in that moment, you feel something strange. Relief, yes, but also a growing certainty he will never ask. And that gives you freedom in a way, the freedom of being underestimated. Later that night, you return to the page. He thinks I am content. That may be my greatest disguise. Your world is not just your husband, it's the house, and not just the rooms you inhabit, but the people who drift through them, like minor characters in a play, where you're the lead but never the director. From the outside, your new home looks refined. Red brick ivy creeping up the side like lacework, a brass knocker polished to perfection. Inside, it is crowded. You were told marriage would be a partnership. You weren't told it came with an audience. Your husband's mother visits frequently, as you already know. But then there's his cousin, who is between places, and his childhood friend, who dines with you 4 nights a week. And let's not forget the household staff. 2 maids, a cook, a footman, and a housekeeper who seems to be running a quiet coup. Even the dog seems to have a schedule more respected than yours. You're never quite alone. The drawing room is no longer yours to rearrange. The parlour's decor was chosen long before your arrival. Your husband prefers the old furniture, the heavy curtains, the portraits of grim ancestors who seem to judge you from the walls. You once moved a vase to a brighter corner and found it quietly replaced. The next morning it turns out the Victorian household is a machine, and you, despite your legal role as mistress of the house, are merely one of its polished gears. The real operations happen beneath your feet, in the kitchen, in the scullery, in whispered conversations among the staff about how her ladyship's too quiet or never touches the bacon. You feel them watching you, judging you the way the cook watches the roasting goose. You try to assert authority. You suggest a change in the breakfast hour. Your husband prefers 9, but you think 8 is more efficient. The butler coughs, the maid drops her spoon, and by next morning, breakfast is served at 9. You realise that despite being nominally in charge, your authority is entirely performative. The real hierarchy is more complicated. The housekeeper answers to your husband, the cook answers to the housekeeper. And you? You answer to tradition. One day, you enter the sitting room and overhear the staff gossiping downstairs. They don't notice you at first. "She doesn't eat," says one. "Looks like she'd faint if the wind blew," says another. A third voice chimes in, older and lower. "She's like them dollies you see in shop windows. Pretty, but not for using." You step back before they see you. You tell yourself you're not crying, just tired. But deep down, you know you've become something decorative, functional, yes, expected to host, to smile, to maintain appearances, but not really known, not even by the people who set your fire and bring your tea. Later, during a dull evening of card games with your husband's cousin, you wonder whether your mother-in-law went through this too, whether the women you see walking Regent Street in quiet resignation feel the same suffocating sense of being watched but never seen. At night, you lie in bed beside your husband and think, I live with him, but not truly with him. We inhabit the same space, we breathe the same air, but we're strangers. Cordial, well-behaved strangers in a house that echoes too loudly, and yet no one would ever guess. The carpets are thick, the silver shines, the servants bow. From the outside, it's the picture of Victorian perfection, but inside you are an exhibit in a carefully curated museum, just another piece in his collection. Your days begin to feel like scripted routines. Rise, dress, smile, supervise, sit, dine, nod, sleep. Even your footsteps on the wooden floors seem rehearsed, paced to match the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. You're not unhappy in a dramatic sense, no slammed doors or shouted accusations, but in a way that seeps in slowly like damp behind wallpaper. It doesn't ruin everything all at once, just softens the foundation, until one day the whole structure feels like it might crumble with a sigh. Your husband remains distant but consistent. Every morning he departs in the same grey overcoat, briefcase in hand, and every evening he returns with the same routine. Dinner, brandy, newspaper, silence. Occasionally he shares bits of Parliament, the stock market, a friend's hunting trip, but never asks you about your day. He assumes there is nothing to ask, and perhaps that's the most crushing part. He doesn't need to hurt you, to diminish you. He simply needs to forget you're more than furniture. But not everyone is so forgetful. There's the maid, Elsie, barely 16, who watches you with wide, dark eyes and a cautious reverence. She curtsies low, speaks little, and never meets your gaze unless prompted. One day, when you drop a handkerchief and she rushes to retrieve it, you thank her softly, and something flickers in her face. Surprise, relief, as if she hadn't expected acknowledgement from a woman in your position. Later that evening, you overhear her in the hallway, whispering to the kitchen boy. "She said thank you," she says, "like I mattered." You sit with that longer than you expect. There's also the cook, Mrs. Bramble, who one afternoon brings you a scone from the batch that turned out particularly good. You compliment the taste. She nods, then lingers. Hard, isn't it? She says, not looking at you. Being the new lady, the house never quite listens to you at first. You blink. It's the first thing anyone said that sounds like truth. You nod, and she nods back. That's it. No further talk. But the next day the tea is warmer and the scones arrive without asking. And then there's your husband's cousin, Edward. He is often at dinner, always quick with a joke, his eyes brighter than the rest. You first assumed he came for your husband, but lately you notice he listens when you speak. He remembers when you mention books, asks questions about the music you're practicing, even laughs at your dry little comments that usually fall into silence. One evening, you find yourselves alone in the conservatory, surrounded by shadowy palms and the scent of damp earth. You look tired, he says, not unkindly. You hesitate, then smile. I suppose I am. He leans in just a little. Well, for what it's worth, you carry it with great dignity. It's a small thing, a compliment tossed like a pebble into a still pool. But the ripples it leaves surprise you. After he leaves, you return to your writing desk. The notebook waits. Dignity, you write, maybe the prettiest cage of all. Your handwriting is a little shakier than usual, but your pulse is not. There are rules you were taught growing up, what to say, how to curtsy, when to lower your eyes. But there were other rules, too. The ones whispered behind fans or slipped between the lines of etiquette books. The rules of what a wife must never speak of, never question, never want. Desire in the Victorian home is like mildew, real, pervasive, and best ignored. You learn this quickly in the first months of your marriage. The bedroom is a place of confusion more than comfort. Not just because the act itself is clumsy or silent or unromantic, but because no one told you how to make sense of your own feelings, or your lack of them, or the way they shift depending on the hour. The look in his eyes, the sound of the door closing behind him. You begin to understand why so many Victorian women were labelled hysterical. Your friend Charlotte, married just a year longer than you, confided over tea that her physician recommended cold baths and spiritual reflection to cure her unseemly sensitivity. Her offence, weeping after being summoned to her husband's bed at midnight. I should be grateful, she said, eyes dull. He says I'm still young enough to bear him another. You nodded at the time, but later, in your room, you wrote, Gratitude and fear wear the same dress in the dark. Some nights your husband reaches for you, wordless, and you yield because it's expected. Other nights he doesn't touch you at all, and somehow that feels worse. You start to wonder which is more unbearable, being used or being unnoticed. And yet you cannot talk about this, not with your mother, who warned you before the wedding. Don't make a fuss about such things, dear. A woman's discomfort is the price of stability. Not with the maid who blushes when you mention needing more linens. Not even with your doctor who assumes your questions about restlessness are female nerves and prescribes a syrup laced with opium. You're not ill. You're just curious, anxious, tired, alive. But the society around you insists that proper women are not supposed to crave, not touch, not question. Men have passions, women have tendencies toward frailty, and so the medical world invented diagnoses to suit the culture. Hysteria, uterine congestion, wandering wombs. Yes, wandering wombs. You laugh when you read that one in a medical journal. The theory goes that if a woman is moody or disobedient, it's because her uterus has quite literally moved to the wrong part of her body. The suggested cures? Pelvic massage, electric stimulation, or in extreme cases, surgical removal. You stop laughing after a while. These aren't old ideas gathering dust in forgotten books. They're practiced, applied, carried out in clinics and drawing rooms by physicians with whiskers and university degrees. Sometimes, under the guise of treatment, women are violated and no one calls it that. In the society section of the Morning Post, you read about Lady G, recently much improved after being sent to a sanitarium for female melancholia. Rumour says her only crime was insisting on a separate bedroom. Her husband, a baron, was congratulated for managing the affair with discretion. You close the paper with shaking fingers. That night, when your husband climbs into bed beside you, you hold your breath and pretend to be asleep. Not out of defiance, just fatigue. He doesn't insist, but the silence between you now has shape, has teeth, and in the dark you begin to wonder, what does it mean to be a wife whose body belongs to another but whose thoughts no longer do? It starts with dreams. Some nights you dream of walking alone down a beach that doesn't exist. Barefoot, hair unpinned, sea wind slicing through your skirts. In the dream, no one is watching you, no one is expecting you. You don't belong to anyone. You wake up with your heart racing and the sheets tangled around your legs, feeling oddly ashamed. Other nights you don't dream at all, just drift in that strange blankness that comes after too much swallowing down what you want to say, and somewhere in the middle, a different kind of question begins to take root. Not what's wrong with me, but what if nothing is? One afternoon you stumble upon a book hidden behind a row of Dickens novels in the library, a medical text of all things written not for women but about them. You flip through diagrams and rigid moralistic pronouncements about sexual excess and wifely moderation, and then you reach a footnote that startles you. A small but growing number of physicians now suggest that women, too, may experience physical pleasure, and its denial may be the cause of certain neuroses. The book was published anonymously. You snap it shut, blood pounding in your ears. The very idea that a woman's body is not just a vessel, not just a duty, but a source of something sovereign, it hits like thunder. But you say nothing, not yet. Instead, you begin to notice things. The way the other wives glance at each other in drawing rooms when their husbands brag about virility, the way some women linger just a moment too long when helping another adjust a corset. You recall one of your aunt's friends, Lady Thistlewood, who never married and lived with her companion for 30 years. You'd thought nothing of it as a child. Now you wonder. And then one rainy afternoon you run into Beatrice, your old schoolmate, at a bookshop. She's wearing a coat far too modern for this side of town, and eyes that carry secrets over tea. She leans in and says, "You look like you need someone to talk to." You hesitate. Then she says, "I know what it's like to be married and invisible. It takes everything not to cry." She speaks in careful phrases, coded but clear, about loneliness, about hunger of all kinds, about the spaces women make when the world gives them none. "You're not alone," she says finally. "There are others." She doesn't explain what that means, but she gives you a name, a meeting place, and a quiet, knowing smile. That night back home, you find yourself staring in the mirror longer than usual. You touch your collarbone, your wrist, the hollow just above your hip. Not with shame, but curiosity for once, not thinking about how someone else might look at you, but how you feel inside your own skin. You realise it isn't passion you fear, it's permission. In your notebook you write, "They train me to be afraid of myself. But I am still here." You don't know what comes next, but for the first time in months, you feel something crack open. Not rebellion exactly, not yet, just a quiet returning and the knowledge that no one, not your husband, not society, not even the law, can govern the secret country blooming behind your ribs. It begins, as many Victorian problems do, with a cough, just a small one, barely noticeable at first, but your husband insists. "Best to have it looked at," he says, setting down his spoon with the authority of someone who's never been ill a day in his life. You nod, not because you agree, but because you know better than to disagree. It's one of those little gestures wives learn to perform without resistance, like wearing mourning colours for someone you never like, or laughing at a joke told 3 dozen times before. So you summon the physician, a man with silver-rimmed spectacles and too much cologne. He arrives late with damp boots and a leather bag that creaks like an old door. He asks you 3 questions. How long have you had the cough? Any trouble breathing? Are you sleeping well? You answer, a few days. Not really. And yes, though none of those answers are particularly true. He peers at your tongue, presses fingers along your throat and declares likely a touch of nervous exhaustion. Women in your position often suffer from it. You're not built for too much strain. You're not sure whether to laugh or scream. Instead, you offer him tea. As he stirs in 2 lumps of sugar, he launches into a well-practiced lecture about the peculiar fragility of the female nervous system. He mentions hysteria, of course, and something about the womb interfering with the lungs, though the logic escapes you. He advises fresh air, limited reading, and a temporary reduction in social calls. He does not ask if you are lonely. He does not ask if you feel safe. He does not ask anything that might make you a person instead of a case. Then he opens his bag and removes a small bottle, green glass, handwritten label. Laudanum. You've heard of it, of course. Every woman has. Opium dissolved in alcohol, prescribed for coughs, headaches, nerves, melancholy, menstrual discomfort, unwomanly agitation. In other words, anything that doesn't conform neatly to the role you've been given. You hold the bottle delicately as if it might burn. It will help you rest, he says with a smile. He means it will help you stay quiet. After he leaves, your husband returns to his study. Do as he says, he calls behind him. No point making it worse. You sit with the bottle in your palm. The amber liquid inside catches the lamplight shimmering like something alive. You don't drink it, not yet. Instead you write. They call it medicine. I call it silencing syrup. But I will not go quietly. That night your dreams are feverish. You are walking through a field of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of you, some smiling, some screaming, some silent. You wake with a start, pulse racing and the cough rattling in your chest like a small rebellion. The next day you pour the laudanum into a flower vase when no one is watching. The lilies wilt. You make a decision not to. You ignore the obligation to call the doctor back. Instead, your daily walks grow longer. This isn't truly for your lungs, though that's the excuse you offer, but for your spirit, for the brief, stolen liberty of moving past your own 4 walls, past the meticulously ordered spaces where every object has a fixed purpose and a label. Out here, even the mist seems like descent, shapeless and unconstrained. On one of these outings, you stop by a bookseller's window. Tucked between poetry collections and books of moral advice is a title you've never encountered. The Female Body and the Mind, New Theories in Gentle Medicine. The cover is unassuming, but something about it suggests defiance, as if the writer slipped it onto the shelf without permission. You go inside and purchase it without comment. Back at your home, you read it in secret, curtains drawn. The author, a woman, though she only signs with her initials, is brave enough to propose that female sorrow isn't an affliction, but a communication. She suggests women aren't inherently fragile, only overridden. That hysteria originates not in the womb, but in the confining world. A certain sentence resonates with you. A society that refuses to hear a woman's voice will always find cause to label her as sick when she finally chooses to speak up. You transcribes the quote into your journal with precise handwriting. That night, over a boring dinner of boiled mutton and cool potatoes, your husband comments that you look more cheerful. It must be the exercise, he says, chewing slowly, or the prescription. You did take the tonic, correct? You smile and say, every single drop. It's a slight deception. The plants enjoyed it after all. You think of the other women who did consume the laudanum, some for sleep, some to cope, some to completely fade away. The actual figures are quietly disturbing. By the 1870s, it's estimated that roughly 1 in 4 middle-class women were using laudanum regularly. Physicians prescribed it casually for every complaint, for every silence they didn't wish to acknowledge. But laudanum did more than mask pain. It stifled fury, confusion, and curiosity. That is why you refused. Not out of courage, but because you are starting to understand that being numb is a greater threat than discomfort. That society expects wives to move through life like sheer window treatments, delicate, transparent, and easily ignored. You have stopped fading. A week later, you return to Beatrice's house. She introduces you to a small group of women who meet every 2 weeks under the guise of studying botany. There are no husbands, no servants, no doctors, just women with keen intellects and measured language, exchanging personal essays and experiences, and, sometimes, just long, meaningful silences. One woman, a widow in her 40s, brings a journal full of unpublished poetry. Another woman reads a letter she once composed for her younger self. It ends with the command, "Don't wait to feel real." You do not contribute that evening, but you remain long after the tea is cold. When you finally return, your husband is asleep. The residence is hushed. You walk past the cabinet where the laudanum is kept and feel not fear, but resolution. Your body still aches. The cough is not entirely gone, but you feel wide awake in a way that surprises you. You whisper softly into the dark, just once, "I am not a diagnosis." And the darkness, for the first time in weeks, seems to acknowledge you. There is a peculiar kind of solitude that settles within a house like this. It is not dramatic or loud, just a faint, persistent background noise, like a clock ticking too loudly when nobody speaks. You come to know it intimately. It follows you from room to room, from morning tea to evening firesides, hiding beneath the carpets and behind the wall coverings. It lingers at the edge of every scripted social event, every formal dinner, every day spent alone while your husband is at his office. But it's more than physical isolation. It's about being essentially ignored even in the presence of another. Your husband is not cruel. He greets you in the morning, nods across the dinner table, and hands you mail with a polite, "This arrived for you." He never shouts, he never strikes. In fact, his voice rarely rises above a quiet observation on the weather. And yet, there are days he cannot recall the colour of your eyes. He mentions you in the third person when guests are present. The wife will show you the garden. She has quite a talent for watercolours. You are a domestic fixture, not a person. Once you stood next to him at a gathering while he recounted a 5-minute story about a holiday you both took to Bath, only you had not gone. It had been his sister. You parted your lips to correct him, then saw his glazed expression, the way the guests simply nodded and said nothing. And perhaps that is the most painful thing of all, the complete indifference. Because how do you mourn something that was never offered? How can you mend a relationship built entirely on social custom and polite omission? You pass your days surrounded by shining surfaces and echoing rooms. You visit the shops, the dressmaker, the flower seller. Your conversations revolve around ribbons, recipes, and the Queen's latest charity. But you feel as if you are living in the margins of a life, someone else's margins. Sometimes when you pass the hall mirror, you catch your own reflection and barely recognise the look in your eyes. It is not exactly sadness. It is invisibility, a slow fading of the self. You begin to observe other couples, at church, in the park, at supper. Most are like you, civil, detached, polite to the point of emotional emptiness. A few are openly hostile, and occasionally, very rarely, you notice something different. A glance that holds too long, fingers brushing beneath the table. Genuine affection. You do not envy them, you ache for them. And that longing deepens. It deepens when you sit opposite your husband and he doesn't notice the ring you stopped wearing, when he doesn't inquire about your writing, when he addresses you, but not as an equal. And worst of all, it deepens when you start to welcome it, when the silence feels safer than the effort of seeking connection. You write in your notebook, We share a house, but we inhabit separate seasons. That is the outcome of Victorian marriage. A shared address with no shared internal life. Two individuals connected by law, tradition and ritual, each quietly dressed and drifting towards separate outcomes. Some days you realize you have not spoken at all until mid-afternoon. It is not planned. It is just that your voice is not required. The staff know their duties, your husband, his schedule. Even the dog, an elderly spaniel who prefers naps to company, seems content to ignore you unless bacon is involved. The world continues whether you speak or not. Then one day, a letter arrives. Not a social request, not a cousin's birth notice, but a genuine letter from your sister, who now lives in the north, far from the velvet furniture and silver tea sets of your existence. She writes, "You never write about how you feel, only what you're doing. Are you truly well?" I sometimes wonder if both of us have vanished into marriages that offer no reflection. You read it 3 times, then carefully fold it and conceal it inside your notebook between 2 blank pages that suddenly feel full of promise. That evening you decide to speak to your husband, not about the dinner or guests or the carriage needing maintenance, but about yourself. You sit across from him in the sitting room, your tea cooling in your hand. You say, "I feel," and then stop. You never rehearse this line, and you are unsure what to say next. He looks up, surprised. "You feel unwell?" he asks, already halfway to the bell pull. You shake your head. "No, I feel lonely." He pauses, blinks, then neatly puts down his newspaper. "You have the staff. You go out frequently. You visit your friends. I have ensured you possess everything you require." The statement hangs in the air like heavy drapery. Everything you need, not everything you desire, not everything you are. You try again. I miss being known. A moment passes, then he awkwardly chuckles. "You're overthinking this again. Perhaps you should cut back on the novels." And just like that, the barrier is back up. Not forcefully, but definitely. You do not try a 3rd time. Later, you sit at your desk. The pen feels heavy. You write, "If a tree falls in a forest and no one hears it, does it make a sound? If a wife vanishes inside a marriage and no one notices, was she ever truly present?" And yet, there is a strange sense of comfort in having written the words down, in knowing that the page sees you, even if he does not. You think of the women you met in Beatrice's group, the quiet rebellion of their lives, the way they create small areas of reality within expectations. One of them secretly plays music, another writes letters to herself from different imaginary people. One knits, and every deliberate dropped stitch is an act of protest. These women are not extremists, they are rememberers. And so you begin the process of remembering yourself. You start playing the pianoforte again, not for company, but in solitude. You choose books your husband would call unsuitable and read them openly in the sun. You walk without an escort. You reply to fewer letters. You remain silent longer when people remark on how fortunate you are. And sometimes, only sometimes, you catch your reflection and smile. Not because you are happy, but because you are still here. Not erased, not gone, not quite. Just waiting. It is only the slightest hint at first, just a scent, orange blossom and musk wafting from the collar of his coat as he hangs it by the entrance. It is not your scent. You do not use perfume that strong. It lingers in the foyer, then in your thoughts, then in your memory, recalling all the subtle things you had trained yourself to ignore. The faint humming from his study when he believes he is alone. The locked compartment in his desk. The sudden desire to travel, to Bath, for a business meeting with no documents in sight. And now, the fragrance. You do not ask immediately, not out of timidity, but because you already know the truth. What you seek now is something completely different. Not a confrontation, not even an admission, just the truth, stripped of pretense. The next night he returns late. No apology. He slowly removes his glove, avoiding your eyes. His vest smells slightly floral again, so you simply ask, "Who is she?" He freezes, blinks, then offers the kind of silence that confirms everything. You wait. Still no reply. He walks past you into the sitting room. I don't know what you are referring to, but he does, and so do you both. Victorian society has many unwritten rules, but few are as common as this one. Men are allowed to have indiscretions as long as they are kept private. Mistresses are not just endured, they are expected in certain circles, hidden away in private residences, in theatre boxes, in corners of men's clubs, with no windows and too much liquor. There is even a term for them, demi-mondaines, women who occupy a half-world of wealth and controversy, too beautiful to dismiss, too improper to fully accept. They wear silks you can't afford, and speak with the assuredness of women chosen after the marriage ceremony. You have seen them before, at dances, at the opera. One even gave you a small knowing smirk once while adjusting her glove. You recall reading about a particular incident in the newspapers, a Lord B, with his affair with a French courtesan. His wife, it was reported, suffered a nervous breakdown and retreated to the country. Society commended her decorum, his reputation remained untarnished. And now, this is your situation. You sit down at your writing table, not to weep, not to shout, but to write. He has someone else. I have myself. And today, that feels nearly sufficient. Later, you open his desk drawer. Inside are letters, dozens of them, carefully folded. The handwriting is deliberate, sloping, and clearly not yours. You read only one. It is elaborate and unkind. In its confidence, it mentions your husband's lonely evenings and how no wife could ever truly understand a man like him. You refold the letter and return it exactly where you found it. No drama, no public scandal, but something inside you hardens. This is more than just infidelity. It is permission, the implicit agreement that his needs excuse his secrets while your own are barely allowed as thoughts. You go to the mirror and look at yourself, the same face, the same clothes. But something is different, not broken, but resilient. In the candlelight you whisper, "If he can have a secret life, then so can I." You do not confront him again. You don't need to. The house becomes a stage for unspoken realities. You navigate your days with the expected composure, serving tea, attending social gatherings, overseeing the household budget, all the while knowing, with absolute certainty, that you are no longer playing the part he wrote. You have become your own alternative, slipping backstage the moment he looks away. And behind that stage, you begin to truly live. It begins subtly. Your walks are longer, but now they have a destination. You pass by certain coffee houses, not for the beverages, but because you know who gathers there. You attend public readings, you recognize certain faces, and once, just once, you allow your gloved hand to briefly touch the fingers of another person beneath a table. You are not having an affair, not yet, but you are considering the possibility of possibility, something Victorian wives were forbidden to do. At the next meeting of Beatrice's group, the topic changes. A woman named Ada, quiet and observant, recounts her sister's annulment, a rare miracle granted only because the husband was found to be unable to consummate the marriage. She uses the word openly, without shame, and the room remains calm. You sit silently until the tea grows cold, then ask, "Have any of you ever sought comfort outside your marriage?" The silence is momentary. Then one woman says yes, another nods. A third simply smiles, not improperly, not recklessly, but honestly. They speak not of illicit sex, but of liberation, of moments of real connection, shared laughter in a reading room, a fleeting touch that made them feel more truly seen than a decade of marriage ever had. You do not mention that your husband is seeing someone else. You don't have to. They already know. And for the first time you realize you are not unique. Not in your solitude, not in your understanding, and certainly not in your anger. Anger is acceptable here. Not the explosive kind, but the slow, measured, silk-gloved kind. The kind that motivates women to write anonymous pamphlets, pass banned books under the table, and look at each other for a second too long in public spaces. You begin to flirt, not brazenly, just enough to remember what it feels like to be desirable, to be asked a question for the sake of the answer. You laugh louder than usual one night at a dinner party and notice your husband looking at you with slight bewilderment, as if noticing you have feelings for the first time in months. You do not offer an explanation. He stops mentioning his business trips. You stop asking. The next time you walk past his study, the door is slightly open. You see him writing, his head bowed, and for a moment you imagine telling him everything. The letters you found, the meetings you've been attending, the whole truth. But then you recall the scent of orange blossom, the drawer full of lies, the silence that followed your question, and so you continue walking. Later, in your journal, you write, "He constructed a world where affection is a privilege for men. I am constructing one where it is a right for me." You flatten the page, light a candle, and pour yourself a glass of wine. Not the diluted port he prefers, but something rich and sweet and chosen by you. And for the first time in your marriage, you raise a glass to yourself. You start to notice the clues everywhere, if not obviously, then just beneath the surface. A nod that is too knowing, a glance that is too quick, an address written a little too carefully in a ledger meant for groceries. London, you realise, is filled with shadows that stir when nobody watches. And hidden within those shadows is a market of secrets. You find it by chance, or perhaps by quiet determination. You are with Beatrice, going to an art supply store near Piccadilly when she suggests a shortcut down a narrow side street. It is lined with signs for ordinary businesses, tailors, bookbinders, tobacco merchants. But behind the third window on the right, past a curtain of dusty lace, is a shop with no name. Inside you find corsets not made for restriction, perfumes prohibited in polite society, and masks, not for balls, but for play. A man in a velvet jacket greets Beatrice by name. "This," she says to you with a slight smirk, "is where people come to remember what their bodies are capable of." Your face flushes before you fully grasp her meaning. It is not all simply scandal. It is something stranger. A kind of liberation wrapped in velvet and illuminated by gaslight. The women here feel no shame, nor are they kept women. They are making choices. One of them, a woman named Lillian, invites you to a private gathering. "Nothing improper," she says with a wink. "Just conversation and honesty." You agree to go. The gathering is held in a small drawing room above a piano repair shop. The blinds are closed, the lights are dim. No one uses their real names. There is no need. You are not here to impress. You are here to absorb. The women speak frankly, not about scandal, but about the absurdity of pretending that passion belongs only to men. Some are married, some are not. A few like you lead such expert double lives that they sometimes forget which is the true one. One woman reads aloud a letter she once received from a lover. A footman decades her junior, who kissed her once behind a glass house and made her feel 17 again. He died of tuberculosis 2 months later, she says, folding the letter with trembling hands. But for one afternoon, I remembered I was alive. Another woman, a former teacher turned writer, speaks about her visits to what she calls the love markets, private clubs, hidden rooms behind pharmacies, places where married women are treated as human beings, not decorations. "We are not there for sin," she says. "We are there for acknowledgement. And you do not speak at all, but you feel something shift, like the loosening of a corset beneath your gown. Not guilt, not excitement, just peace. Peace that you are not insane, not damaged, not isolated. Victorian society would call these women ruined. But as you observe their confidence, their composure, their sense of self, you realise how wrong that word is. Ruin implies destruction. These women have rebuilt themselves. That night, as you leave, Lillian presses a small card into your hand. A name, an address, no explanation. If you ever need to remember what being desired feels like, she says, they will know who sent you. You slip the card into your glove and step out into the London fog. And for the first time in a long while, the cold air on your skin feels like proof that you completely exist. Back home, you enter your sitting room with the expected composure of a wife returning from an errand. Your husband does not look up from his reading. He never asks where you go anymore. He assumes, as always, that proper behaviour is a certainty. You sit, pour tea, fold your gloves, and in your pocket, the card Lillian gave you pulses against your thigh like a heartbeat. You do not go that night, nor the next. You are not rushing into rebellion. You are gradually unfolding like a letter you have been afraid to open. But the invitation is now present, woven into the fabric of your consciousness. And something else is growing alongside it. A new kind of self-assurance, not loud, not ostentatious, but undeniable. You speak differently at dinner parties. You laugh at things you are not supposed to find funny. You ask real questions of men who are not accustomed to being challenged. One gentleman nearly chokes on his soup when you suggest that perhaps not every woman was destined to remain in the nursery or the drawing room. You lock eyes with Beatrice across the table. She raises her glass in a silent affirmation. And then, on an evening when the house feels particularly heavy with silence and good manners, you do it. You dress simply. No lace, no jewels, just a dark cloak, gloves, and sturdy walking boots. You take a hired carriage, not to the theatre or the florist, but to a part of the city you have never seen this late. The gas lamps flicker. The mist drifts over the cobblestones like vapour from a hidden flame. You locate the entrance, tap once, then again. A lady answers. Neither young nor old. She possesses a beauty that suggests chiselling, intentional, and steadfast. You are anticipated, she states. Inside, the space is hushed, warm, illuminated by a fixture that seems lifted from a fantasy. Music plays, soft, minor tones on a piano in the adjoining room. Women and men converse in subdued voices. Glassware rings gently. Laughter rises without echo, and everyone appears genuinely present. No pretences, no affected manners. A gentleman approaches. He is not remarkable, not ostentatious, yet he holds your gaze as if you were the single occupant of the room. I have heard of you, he mentions. You raise a brow. From whom? He smiles. Someone who truly sees you. You do not inquire about the meaning. It is unnecessary. You converse with him for an hour. Nothing occurs that would warrant attention from the gossip columnists. Yet you depart with a sensation you have not known in years. Recognised, not as a spouse, not as the keeper of a dwelling, simply as yourself. When you return home, the sitting room is empty, the hearth is cold. Your husband is already sleeping. You disrobe slowly, folding your garments, not as required duties, but like offerings to your own self. You light a single candle, settle at your desk, and open your journal. Tonight, you do not manage a line. You complete a page. You detail the entryway, the chandelier, the voice that spoke. You capture the instant you laughed and did not second-guess the sound. You conclude with, in a metropolis where so many women are traded, negotiated or dismissed, there remain pockets where we discover one another, and in those pockets we remember we are not his, we are not theirs, we are ours. You first hear of her in murmurs, not a companion, not even a familiar face, just a name exchanged over teacups at a lawn gathering. Mrs. Eliza Fairfax, 29 years old, formerly residing in Gloucester Square, the wife who abandoned her marriage. It is cited as a scandal naturally. One woman lowers her voice to disclose. She ran off with a writer. Another dismisses it with an eye roll. She was always theatrical. A third quietly observes. She will regret this. No one respects a woman who causes a disruption, but not one person mentions the reason. And when they finally do, you learn Eliza was married to a banker. Reserved, rigid, neither ever cruel nor ever kind. She had no children, no personal income, and no allowance to travel. She requested an annulment citing neglect. Neglect. and was openly ridiculed in court. Jurists asserted her husband provided shelter, food, and his company when convenient. What more could she possibly desire? She departed regardless, took nothing, shed her married identity like an unfastened corset. Now, depending on the source, she resides in France with a playwright, or in Kent with her sibling, or lives sinfully with no one at all. The crucial point is that she left, and society has labelled her ungrateful. That adjective stays with you. It always does. Because you are beginning to observe exactly how many women are penalised not for violating the conventions, but for refusing to accept the conventions are benevolent. Annulments, separations, and divorces in your social sphere are not merely legal confrontations, they are the public destruction of one's standing. For a male, infidelity is a failing. For a female, it is definitive. You have seen the announcements. In the morning paper, wife of Captain Thorne. Separated due to inappropriate conduct. No context, no chance to appeal, merely banishment. In print. The Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857 was meant to transform everything. It permitted secular divorce. It made the legal steps somewhat more accessible to the affluent middle class. But the specifics made one point undeniable. A man could divorce his wife solely for infidelity. A woman had to substantiate infidelity plus brutality, desertion, or another serious offence. So much for fairness. You reflect on Caroline Norton once more, the author who battled for her own children, her own identity, and still failed. A woman who contributed to changing the statute, only to be personally ruined by its existing terms. She never remarried. She once penned, "An English wife is not merely the possession, but the servant of her husband." You did not grasp her meaning when you first read, that years ago. You do now. One morning you see correspondence addressed to your husband from a law office. You are not supposed to see it, but it lies open, resting on his desk, casually abandoned in a moment of inattention. It is not about commerce. It is from a solicitor affirming a monetary arrangement between your husband and a woman you suspect is his mistress, the one with the orange blossom perfume. The communication is brief, formal, and strikingly impersonal. A purchased silence. You look intently at the page, not with rage, but with perfect clarity. He would never risk exposure. He would rather purchase tranquility than articulate the truth. And should you ever dare to speak yours, the legal system would not be there for your defence. Not yet. You occupy the study chair, his chair, and write just a single sentence on a piece of paper. "If I depart, I will not request your endorsement." You fold it, slide it beneath the leg of the chair. He will never discover it. That is irrelevant. It is for you. The notion of freedom settles within your being like an internal framework, silent, steadfast, concealed beneath all your public actions. You start to perceive your routines not as necessary structure, but as disguise. Every polite curve of the mouth, every agreement with the grocer, every courtesy at the church entrance, all of it, it buys you time. You are not planning an escape, not precisely. You're preparing to be ready. You consult a seamstress you rely on. You ask about altering a few older garments, a slightly tighter fit at the waist, not because the tailoring is needed, but because it provides a pretext to meet. She was widowed early and unofficially remarried. Her second husband, a woodworker without status, but with genuine kindness in his expression. She mends more than skirts. She mends confidences. You begin accumulating currency. Nothing significant, just a few coins tucked into the lining of a clutch bag you rarely use. You gather names. Females who might provide refuge, males who owe you nothing but respect. Addresses of lodgings near Brighton, reading rooms in Hampstead, streets where your face is unknown, and you start to contemplate the ultimate question. What would it demand for you to abandon everything? Because here is the undeniable fact. Beneath all the layers of propriety and legislation, beneath the girdles and social rituals and embellished falsehoods, there is always a moment when a woman sees the way out. Not a metaphor, a real passage, a tangible border. Some traverse it, most do not, because of the disgrace, the ruin, the uncertainty, the correspondence that will cease to arrive, the name revoked, the accounts frozen, the friends who will profess we simply cannot be associated with her because of the children. If children exist, because of the terror. But what if you are beyond terror? One evening at another of Beatrice's social events, the conversation shifts to the woman who left. Not Eliza Fairfax this time, but another. Someone one of the women knew from school. She disappeared after a court proceeding. Rumour suggests she is now an artist in Marseille. She frequently declared, one woman remembers, that she would rather be impoverished and her own person than invaluable and unseen. No one speaks. For a moment the quiet seems like reverence, and then a soft voice, Ada's again, asks, "I wonder if men ever lie awake considering the potential cost of being free." You return home that night without any memory of the carriage ride. The lanes are a blur, your thoughts are louder than the horses. In the reception area, your husband acknowledges you with a look. You are delayed, I know. He observes you. Something registers behind his eyes. Not suspicion exactly, but assessment, as if he is only now realizing you possess your own movements. "You have changed," he remarks, setting down his glass of liquor. You offer a slight smile. Yes. He does not ask how or why. He walks away. In your bedroom, you sit at your writing desk and compose a document. You do not affix your signature. You do not record the date. It begins. To whom it may concern, this is not a withdrawal. It is a reclaiming. You seal it in an envelope and place it in the bottom compartment of your dressing table, underneath old gloves and dry lavender. And you wait. You wait not for approval, but for the opportune moment, because you now comprehend an essential truth. Victorian matrimony is a contractual agreement, but liberty is a definite statement. The notebook is nearly filled now. The pages, once hesitant and measured, have become densely covered. Scrawled, margins crossed out, thoughts, words so intense they almost pierce the paper. But they belong to you, every phrase, every occurrence, every mark of ink, every instant. You refuse to vanish quietly, and yet you cannot disclose it, not publicly, not to your husband, not even to Beatrice. It is too revealing, too perilous. So you begin drafting other correspondence, documents you never intend to dispatch. The initial one is to your mother. You start with, "You never informed me of the difficulty of being loved," conditionally. You detail how you have been compelled to discover what it means to be a woman by observing others conform, diminish, smile. How the sound of your own laughter occasionally surprises you because it occurs so seldom now. How marriage, despite all its regulations, provides almost no resolutions to the fundamental concerns. You do not write in hostility, you write in sorrow. You seal the envelope, then conceal it between the pages of a book you are certain she will never open. The second is to your past self. You write. They will embellish it with lace and solemn promises, but it remains a confinement if you are not permitted to determine your own existence. You try to recall her aspirations. A small dwelling, a canine companion, a man who posed inquiries and awaited the responses. You wonder if she would recognize you now, or pity you, or perhaps just maybe be proud of your persistence. The third letter proves the most challenging. It is addressed to him, your spouse. You start, then halt, begin again. This one is not hostile either. It is impartial, dispassionate, a documentation, a blueprint of all the spaces you have occupied together, without truly connecting. You do not accuse. You do not beg. You simply state the facts. You write. You have a tendency to offer kindness at a fixed price. You do not demand my articulation, yet you resent my silence. You claim to desire peace, but what you truly mean is subservience. You pause, then continue. I think somewhere within yourself you believe you have been a respectable man. And perhaps you have. But being not abusive is not equivalent to being benevolent. You fold this letter more tightly than the others. It is placed inside the notebook. By now, the pages are layered with thoughts no one will ever peruse. Correspondence to your sister, to the woman he favours, to Providence, to the child you never bore, to the woman you might still evolve into. Each entry creates a little more capacity within you. A woman you encountered at Beatrice's association once remarked, "The challenge is not that we are unable to express ourselves, it is that the world is structured to feign deafness to us." You often contemplate that idea. You consider how many women possess cabinets filled with unsent correspondence, journals hidden beneath floorboards, entire identities stacked behind kitchen utensils and stitched phrases like fine particles accumulating in stillness. And tonight, you add one more. You dip the pen, draw it across the sheet. "If no one attends, I will still utter." You gently dry the ink, and somewhere in the dark residence the timepiece chimes 11. You begin to understand the strength of what can never be posted. Each document you generate is a truth set free, even if it exists perpetually folded in silence. Yet the practice of writing, of moulding your sadness and anger into something readable, transforms into your defiance. One afternoon you put your notebook inside a container, lined with antique satin gloves and scrap material, then conceal the box within your clothing cupboard. It does not feel like concealment. It feels like safeguarding, like preserving a facet of yourself no one else has ever encountered. But one day someone might need to, perhaps a young relative or a stranger, or even your future self. That thought offers consolation. There is one piece of correspondence that preoccupies you more than the others, not due to its content, but because of its potential. A letter you commence repeatedly. A letter intended for the woman he is seeing. You have never written her name, even in your private journal. It is as if naming her grants her authority, or worse, gives her a narrative. But tonight you attempt it. You begin with, "I harbour no ill will toward you." You even surprise yourself. You assumed you might, but the longer you write, the more clearly you perceive. She is not the designer of this situation. She is merely caught up in it, like you. Another woman presented with something appealing, promised something dependable, given a partial truth and expected to feel complete. You write, "You do not owe me an apology, but I hope you are aware he maintains a compartment for his undisclosed matters, and it is very, very full." Then, unexpectedly, your hand trembles because a part of you wonders, has she also drafted a letter she cannot send? You close the notebook, not from fatigue, but because the truth is starting to feel heavier than the quiet. The following morning, your husband mentions a weekend hunting excursion in Sussex. He does not inquire if you would like to accompany him. He assumes, as always, that you will be content here, solitary in a building filled with glass fixtures and chiming clocks and atmosphere that listens but never replies. But this time, you do not consent. You do not smile. You state, "Perhaps I will take a trip as well." He turns, perplexed. "To where?" You sip your tea. "I am not certain yet. Somewhere I have never been." Does not that sound delightful? He examines your face, searching for playfulness or hostility or specific meaning. But you offer him none. You have spent years projecting transparency for others. Now you are retaining it for yourself. Later, you walk to the collection box, not to mail anything, just to sense the weight of all the documents you have not. You press your covered fingers to the cold metal and softly say, "Not yet," because there is something profound in knowing you could mail them, that the expressions exist, that your account is not erased, simply because it remains unsent. Back inside, you add a fresh page to your notebook. At the top, in precise black handwriting, you put down Volume 2 because you are not finished, because the truth is ongoing, and because silence, once interrupted, can never be completely restored. It begins, as most illicit things do, with something subtle. A hand resting a moment too long on your glove as it is returned. A volume given back with the corners folded, not from oversight, but from appreciation. A discussion that deviates ever so slightly into the realm of sincere sentiment. He is not unknown. He has attended 3 of Beatrice's gatherings. You had observed his quiet attentiveness, the way he asks questions without bias. Not the type of man who boasts, just one who perceives. Initially, it is merely conversation. You encounter him in a bookstore, then again at a gallery. You discuss artwork, but not the conventional, not which pieces are suitable for drawing rooms. You speak of illumination, expressions, absence. He asks for your opinion, then waits for your response. You are surprised by the infrequency of that occurrence. One day, he remarks, "Your husband must admire your intellect." You laugh before you can stop yourself. I am not sure he has ever encountered it. The comment lingers in the air like vapour. Neither of you pretends not to notice. And so commences the engagement. Not the passionate kind described in narratives, full of torn fabric and dramatic declarations. No, this is quieter, more hazardous due to its understatement. You start to notice him observing you. Not your attire, not your social standing, but you. He retains information. Your preferred excerpt from Shelley that you dislike. The scent of cinnamon, the way your speech softens when you are fatigued. He once presents you with a pressed violet concealed in a book without explanation. You gaze at it for 3 full minutes after he departs, and you recall what it feels like to be seen clearly in your own residence. Your husband becomes a background presence, still courteous, still unremarkable. He comments on your new arrangement of hair without realizing it is unchanged. He does not notice the documents placed in your desk drawer, words written in your own hand, now suddenly mirrored by someone else's. You have previously written about physical contact, the rules governing it, the absence of discussion around it, but now you are experiencing it. You stand a little closer to him at social events. Your fingers graze his sleeve when you offer the tea. One afternoon, when no one is watching, he adjusts your wrap, and for an instant his knuckles brush the back of your neck. You shiver. You write that evening with ink so intense it soaks through the page. To be acknowledged is one matter. To be touched with respect, like a sacred place, not a commodity, is entirely different. But here is the unfortunate aspect of life in this era. Even genuine affection can be prohibited. There is no correspondence, no evidence. Yet if anyone suspected, even without an embrace, even without a pledge, you would be the one blamed. Not him. Never him. You are familiar with the description for women like you. Restless, overly educated, impulsive. You have heard the narratives, the whispered accounts. Like Mrs. Langley, who was seen walking with a man whose wife had passed away at twilight and was never invited to a garden gathering again. Or Miss Havisham, who allowed a single gentleman to stay at her boarding house and awoke to find her linens slashed and her windows sealed with bricks. No accusations, no definitive proof, only repercussions. But you are weary of living as if repercussions are your sole guiding force. So, you begin to ask a different inquiry. Not what might I forfeit, but what might I finally experience? The first time he touches your hand, truly touches it. It occurs in the most mundane location imaginable. You're departing from a gathering, the kind with excessive hot drinks and insufficient honesty, where discussion revolved entirely around matters of no consequence. The climate, the decor, who was seen where with whom. You both exit quietly early, claiming tiredness. Outside the air is sharp and moist, a dense vapour rolling in as if summoned. He extends his arm. You hesitate, then take it. Halfway down the road as a carriage rumbles past. His fingers slide over yours, palm to palm, steady, warm, still. He does not look at you, does not speak, and neither do you, because in that moment everything has been communicated. You return home to a dwelling that feels colder than usual. The overhead light flickers, the entryway smells of cleaning product and cooked meat. You recognise how long it has been since anyone in this space touched you. Without obligation, you write. A single contact in the street conveys more truth than 100 nights in the same matrimonial bed. In the days that follow, something shifts within you. Not reckless impulse, not romantic fainting spells, but a quiet assurance, as though a storm that had long been building inside you has at last found direction. Not fleeing, moving forward. You do not arrange meetings, they occur naturally. You chance upon him at the gallery. He is studying a brochure on portraiture. He offers it to you and says you would find this interesting. It focuses on how darkness defines the subject. You accept it. You understand his meaning. Another time, at the rental library, he hands you a volume wrapped in neutral paper. No title visible. Inside, poetry. Authentic poetry. The kind that ignites slowly and asks no permission. There is a section highlighted. Love, when it discovers me, will not announce itself. It will press its hand against mine and wait. You weep, reading it not audibly, just enough to remember you are still capable. And throughout it all your husband remains oblivious or unwilling to observe too closely. He notices the subtle melody in your speech. Occasionally he inquires, "Are you feeling improved?" As if he is noting a seasonal change. You agree. You are feeling more. You disclose nothing to anyone, not even Beatrice. Some realities are too delicate for articulation. They would disintegrate under scrutiny. Because what you share is not an infidelity, not in the way society defines it. There are no dishevelled linens or audible floorboards. What you share is recognition. You begin to understand how many women throughout history lived and passed away without ever being truly seen, without ever having someone lean forward, not to possess them, but to genuinely acknowledge them. And now, someone has. You occasionally wonder what might happen if you allowed it to intensify. You envision it, a private space, an embrace, the instant his hand moves from yours to your cheek, the distance between you vanishing like a held breath. But you do not act upon it, not because you fear the consequences, but because what you share is yours, completely, privately, sacredly. It exists in shared looks, in written lines of poetry, in your hands briefly touching like vessels passing in the dense air, softly communicating, "I see you. I know you are there." And for the present, that is sufficient. More than sufficient. It is a Thursday when you meet her, the woman who makes the world slightly uneven, as if some unstated stability has altered in a manner no one else perceives. Yet you sense it immediately. She is seated across from you at a midday meal hosted by one of Beatrice's more adventurous friends. The type of gathering where the sugar is laced with spirits and the pianist plays Chopin a little too quickly. She wears a navy garment tailored like a male's and a hat positioned as if she is fully aware of its impact. Her hand coverings are removed, her hands are refined. Her voice, when she speaks, descends like silk over a smooth floor. You do not grasp her name initially because she does not offer it. Instead, she states, "You appear to be someone who also does not belong here." You pause, smile, then respond. "I believe I am still deciding." She offers a gentle chuckle. That is a valuable perspective. Later, Beatrice leans in and whispers. Her name is Clara. She is complex, but by then you are already certain. You have never seen anyone fold linen with such determination. Throughout the afternoon, Clara discusses subjects no woman is supposed to mention in public, about literature banned by the circulating libraries, about a female sculptor whose work was judged too muscular for a lady, about trousers. Trousers not for men, but for women who decline to accept that movement must be paired with modesty and limitation. You realise with a sudden awareness that you are observing her intently, and she is aware of it. She catches your eye over the rim of her drinking cup. Does not look away. That evening you write, she looked at me as if I were a story she had already read but wished to hear narrated anyway. Clara becomes an identity that lingers, a subtle presence in your consciousness, an incomplete thought in your record. And then, like all enticing things, she reappears, not at a social event, but on the street. You are leaving the pharmaceutical shop, replenishing the household supply of floral essence. An errand so utterly mundane you feel yourself shrinking into it when she materializes next to you. "I thought that was you," she says, and she says it as if it were the most natural occurrence imaginable, as if she had anticipated this moment all week. She proposes to walk with you. You hesitate just long enough to remember you are a married woman in broad daylight in the upscale district. Then you say, "I would enjoy that." You walk for 20 minutes, perhaps half an hour. You talk about trivial subjects, retail outlets, cultivated areas, books, but the tension between your shoulders eases in a way it has not in months. She asks how you have been, and when you respond, she listens in a way that feels both unfamiliar and deeply familiar. At the corner of St. James and Maddox, she says, "There is a small establishment I visit when I prefer not to be anyone's accessory. Would you accompany me sometime?" You do not assent immediately. You say, "I believe I already have," and for the first time in a very long period you do not feel like a spouse. You feel like a woman with a private detail, a fresh start. The establishment is concealed on a quiet lane that does not seek attention. No elaborate gold signs, no decoration, just a slightly damaged blue entrance and panes misted somewhat from the warmth inside, the kind of location no reputable wife should be seen lingering in alone. But you are not there alone. Clara arrives, already seated. Somehow she has ordered the beverage, not the delicate scented variety served in reception rooms, but potent dark Indian tea poured into substantial earthenware cups. She does not rise when you enter. She does not offer assistance with your outerwear. She simply says, "You arrived," as if it were a certainty. You sit down. The surface between you is small, the outside world beyond the window even smaller. Initially, you speak cautiously around the core issue. You discuss literature and gardens again, but gradually the barrier dissolves. She asks, "What did you imagine matrimony would feel like?" You attempt to answer. You try to assemble the vocabulary, but it eludes you. So she assists you. "I used to imagine it would feel like being chosen." You confirm this with a slight nod, and the gesture breaks open something inside your chest. She shares a story, fragments of it at least, enough to understand she once attempted matrimony, once tried doing things conventionally, and then ceased the pretense. "I was too much," she says, stirring her drink. Or perhaps they were never sufficient. She avoids the specific term, but it is implied. She is different. You have heard the descriptive terms whispered before. Inverts, deviants, Uranian women, labels wrapped in obscure language to make them sound like illnesses. Even the newspapers sometimes refer to female intimacies of an intense nature, always with a subtle implication that aims for scandal but conceals a deeper apprehension. You should be fearful. You should leave, but you remain. Instead, you lean closer and ask, "Do you ever regret the pretense?" She meets your gaze. "No, I miss feeling secure, but I have never regretted ceasing to be overlooked." You realize with a burst of understanding that feels like lightning that Clara is not attempting to entice you. She is attempting to invite you into a self you always suspected was achievable, but never dared to open the door to. Back at home, you find yourself examining the way other women interact. The light contact of a hand on a shoulder, a look held too long, a laugh that carries a deeper meaning. You observe how much kindness is exchanged between women when men are not paying attention. You observe how often men do not pay attention. Clara writes you a note, not flowery, not poetic, just, "I hope you know that being acknowledged is not the same as being desired, and that desire in the appropriate context can feel like understanding." You fold the note into your notebook, not alongside your letters to your husband or your mother, but in its own space, a new sequence. You disclose nothing about the small establishment or the strolls or the way Clara occasionally touches your wrist with a kind of gentleness you believed no longer existed. You do not engage in a physical embrace with her. You do not need to. You are embraced by the way she listens, by the way you articulate, by the way the world feels accessible again when she is near. In your journal that evening you write, If matrimony is the confinement, she is the outlook, and for now that is sufficient. You're seated in the drawing room one rainy afternoon, pretending to read when the legal representative arrives. He is not present for you, naturally. He has come to speak with your husband, but he offers a courteous inclination, presents his calling card, and is escorted into the study with the customary quiet and clinking of liquor containers. You remain in your seat, your book open to the identical page. It has been there for 20 minutes, your beverage cooling by the fireplace. But something about his presence bothers you. Later that night, when the precipitation has stopped and your husband is absent at his gentleman's club, you walk silently into the study. The air still carries a faint trace of smoke and fragrance, and there, on the edge of the desk, is a pamphlet folded, left behind like a hint. The Marriage Act Amendment, implications for assets, guardianship, and civil dissolution. You stop, then read. It is technical, dense, legal terminology, but beneath the formal language, there it is, the government's slow, systematic attempt to adjust the regulations of marriage. What constitutes cruelty when property might remain under a woman's ownership, how disputes over children could be resolved without subjecting a family reputation to public disgrace. You have heard faint references to these revisions before, but seeing them printed, official, concrete, it feels like realizing that a fracture in the structure has widened, not yet an opening, but no longer a mere surface crack. You take the document and read it in bed under a weak light, your breathing shallow as the clauses are revealed. If approved, this legal change would permit a wife to maintain ownership of her inherited assets during her marriage, to file for a legal separation without needing to prove both infidelity and abuse, and to retain custody of children under the age of 7. In certain contexts, it is not total freedom, but it does offer leverage. As you note, the law might not embrace me, but it could finally begin to recognize my presence. In the ensuing days, you commence a clandestine study. You acquire texts using a pseudonym at the lending library, legal analysis, court transcripts, even commentaries from dissenting lawyers. It is laborious. It is thrilling. You underline terms like restitution, coverture, and jurisprudence, treating them as if they were magical formulas. You discover that under existing law, the instant you married, you forfeited your status as a legal entity. You became a dependent. This was a factual, not merely a figurative condition, femme covert, a woman sheltered by her husband's identity, as though your individual self was a flame extinguished and replaced by his radiance. You reflect once more on Caroline Norton, her struggle, her intensity. You contemplate how many women never even grasped the nature of the confinement they were in. And you begin composing a profoundly bold text, a formal paper, not a correspondence, not a personal journal entry, but an official request. You do not plan to submit it yet, but you draft it as if you would, addressed to the Parliament of Her Majesty's Government. I assert that the institution of matrimony, as presently structured, fails to uphold the dignity, security, and independence of the women it purports to honour. You reference case histories and include annotations. You write as though the very walls are listening, and for the first time you want them to. And while your spouse discusses taxes and fox hunting over brandy, you are organising a silent rebellion with ink and legislative notes, because even if you remain, even if you never raise your voice, you are mastering the system now, not to conform to it but to outgrow it. One morning, you enter the dining room and observe your husband reading the newspaper. Nothing out of the ordinary, but this time he stops. He angles the page and frowns. Then he remarks about women's demands for separate funds. Apparently they seek their own income now. What on earth would they use it for? You lift your teacup and sip deliberately, the heat steadying you. What would they use it for? Everything, you think. Nothing. But internally you complete his statement with a vehemence he will never detect. They would live. You watch him fold the paper and resume eating his breakfast. He is unaware of the contents of your desk drawer. He does not know you have memorised the date Parliament is scheduled to consider the amendment's next reading. He is oblivious that you have copied segments of speeches from women audacious enough to confront men in powdered wigs and demand fundamental rights. He certainly doesn't know you have started corresponding with women's organisations under a false name, letters of encouragement, not as an activist, but as an observer. "I cannot protest," you wrote, "but I see your efforts. I hold your cause close to my heart." And then something new, an invitation. One of your letters receives a reply. A Mrs. Abigail Penrose from Manchester writes back in neat, sloping script. She mentions that she received your message with a sense of connection I had forgotten I was permitted to experience. She invites you to a discreet gathering of like-minded writers, women who correspond, champion, instruct, and yes, even challenge the status quo. You neither accept nor decline, but the letter is slipped beneath your pillow, and you discover you sleep more deeply with it there. Then, a week later, a change occurs. You receive an envelope delivered directly, not via the postal service. Inside is a copy of the current Gazette. Your name is absent, of course, but there, in a minor column, is an anonymous opinion piece that rings agonizingly familiar. It echoes your phrasing, your central point, the rhythm of your own sentences. Someone published a portion of your draft. Initially, your heart pounds. Fear constricts your chest, but subsequently, nothing happens. No knock on the door, no disgrace, no public humiliation. Just quiet, followed by a slight reaction. At Beatrice's subsequent tea party, a woman you have never exchanged a word with approaches you during refreshments and comments softly, "I believe the author of that article must be utterly weary of pretense." You offer no response, but she presses a small item into your palm. A silver pin shaped like a writing feather. A token, a signal, a secret. You wear it the following day, not visibly on your clothing, but hidden inside your sleeve against your skin. That afternoon, while strolling through the neighbourhood, you notice another woman wearing the same shimmer of silver near her collarbone. She sees yours, and you see hers. Neither of you speaks, but you share a smile, because now you realise there are others. You are not a solitary woman appealing to a locked barrier. You are a multitude of keys quietly turning. And whether the legislation is reformed tomorrow or not, something else has already changed. You. You have discovered that the discourse of liberation is not always shouted in public. Sometimes it is quietly noted in margins, concealed in drawers, pinned behind lace, and yet it still achieves the impossible. You go home that evening. You take your seat at your desk and you start again, this time not as a wife but as an author. There is an infant in your arms, not yours. He belongs to your cousin Agatha, who recently gave birth to her second child. You travelled for the visit, partly out of obligation, partly to escape the escalating tension within your own household. The baby is wrapped in delicate cotton, gazing up at you with the wariness of someone newly introduced to the world. His small hand instinctively wraps around your finger, and the sensation catches you off guard, not because of the child, but because of your reaction. Not desire, not even affection, but disorientation. The women nearby coo and chatter, commending Agatha on her success, on the speed of her recovery, on the child's striking resemblance to his father. There is sweet cake, a nurse positioned in the corner. Everyone is smiling, as if this event encapsulates the very essence of womanhood. You hold the child for 10 minutes and then hand him back. That night in the guest chamber, with a gentle fire crackling in the fireplace, you lie awake with a single question resounding in your mind. What if I had done it? What if you had unquestioningly pursued the expected course? Allowed your body to be defined by expectations, wedding, conception, motherhood? What would your existence resemble now? Would your husband have been different? Would you have been? You recall anecdotes whispered during afternoon teas, women who silently miscarried and were told to never mention it, as if sorrow was unacceptable. others who birthed one child after another without having a choice, becoming frail and withdrawn under the burden of gratitude they were expected to display, and those who bore none and were either pitied or blamed, or both. You remember one woman who said with a weary chuckle, "Once the baby is here, your body ceases to be yours. But truly I am not convinced it ever was." And that idea is what keeps you awake now. Not the dread of hardship or self-sacrifice or even failure. It is the realization that motherhood in this society is not a free choice. It is an obligation presented as a deep feeling, and to reject it is viewed not as self-preservation, but as defiance. Your husband has brought up children, of course, casually, impersonally. "We will need a son eventually," he once stated during a roast beef dinner. You recall nodding because that was the appropriate action. You remember questioning whether wanting something is diminished when the decision has already been made for you. Back at home, he mentions it again. "We aren't getting any younger," he states. "You are 28, you remind him gently. "This might not be the opportune time." He frowns. "It is not about timing. It is the purpose of marriage," he says, in the way one might declare, "This is what fireplaces are for, heat, what tables are for, dining," as if your physical form is merely an item of furniture in the structure of his existence. You remain silent. That night, you open your writing pad. You write, "There is a version of myself I have yet to encounter, and I will not exchange her for a domestic duty I never requested." You are uncertain if you want to be a mother. You are uncertain if you ever will. But you are now certain of one thing. You will not do it merely to fulfill someone else's notion of a woman. If it occurs, it will be your choice, your timing, and no one, not your husband, not your mother, not the society that labels childless women as unfulfilled, will get to make that choice for you. Weeks pass and the house begins to resonate with a different sort of quiet. Not the cold, detached stillness of two people growing distant, but the profound hush of actions not yet verbalized, of a decision suspended in the air like haze over a field boundary. You sense it in the way your husband more frequently clears his throat during meals, or in the way his hand pauses before resting on the small of your back, as if he is still attempting to conjure the version of you he once expected. He brings it up again one Sunday morning. No preparation, just a casual remark over the newsprint. "I have scheduled an appointment with Dr. Harrow for a fertility assessment," he says. "The sooner, the better." You stare blankly. He doesn't lift his head. You say, "You consulted a physician about me." Now he briefly looks your way, surprised. It is not exclusively about you. It is about us. But you know better. No, it is about lineage and control. He grows rigid. It is a natural desire to have offspring. You fold your napkin. Not gently. It is a natural desire to have input in the matter. You exit the room before he can respond. You do not wish to hear him elaborate on your perceived unreasonableness, how other women would be overjoyed. You have already heard variations of that argument your entire life, from instructors, from neighbours, from older women who discussed duty in hushed tones as if it were identical to affection. You proceed to your writing desk, but today you do not write in your personal notebook. You retrieve a different page, a clean sheet. You start drafting a letter. Not to anyone you know, but to the woman you imagine sitting in another substantial house in another town, harbouring the identical fear in her chest. You write, "They claim that motherhood represents complete womanhood, but I have witnessed too many mothers lose their identity in pursuit of it. I have observed too many crib-shaped confinements." You do not mail the letter. You fold it, slide it into an envelope, seal it closed, and conceal it in the lining of your dressing gown. Because a time may come when you will need a reminder of why you made your choice. Later that week, your husband brings home an infant's head covering. Pale pink, hand-stitched. He places it on your dressing table without a word, as if this gesture might encourage your body to comply, as if this might accomplish what fondness and partnership failed to. You look at it, then pick it up. The stitching is meticulous, neat. Someone, somewhere, crafted this with care. You trace the seam with your finger and whisper, "I will not become a mother through coercion." That night, you take the bonnet, carefully wrap it, and carry it down to the river. You release it to the current. You watch it spin and float away, lighter than your breath. And in the darkness, you do not feel incomplete. You feel whole. Because what you are building is not a heritage defined by ancestry. It is one defined by deliberate choice. The atmosphere in the house changes after the bonnet incident. He does not mention it. He never asks where it disappeared. But the air between you becomes cooler, more rigid. Not actively hostile, not yet, but vigilant, as if something previously dormant has awakened. And although it has not yet surfaced, it is monitoring you now. He stays out later than usual. Dinners become briefer. Your conversations are reduced to essentials. Brief mentions of financial accounts, a note about an upcoming formal dinner, the occasional mundane comment about the weather or current affairs. Nothing intimate, nothing genuine. But strangely, you experience no remorse, only clarity. You start selecting darker coloured attire, not because of sorrow, but out of preference. The vivid light shades of your younger days no longer suit you. You have surpassed them. Like old gloves, restrictive, designed for someone who never asked questions. Now you wear deep blue, forest green, shades of dark red. You secure your hair more loosely. You are starting to look like someone even your husband barely recognizes anymore, and that seems to trouble him. One evening, as he enters the drawing room and finds you writing, he pauses. You never devoted so much time with your focus on a notebook. You do not look up. I never previously knew what to write. He offers no reply, but you feel the significance of his presence in the creaking floorboards as he walks away. That night, as the fire quietly fades and the lamps cast a gentle gold-toned light across your desk, you do something you have not dared before. You write a will, not a legally binding one, not enforceable under the laws that still view you as your husband's financial dependent, but a genuine one. You title it simply, "In the event of my death, whether physical or spiritual." You write, "To my sister I bequeath the blue neck scarf she gave me the year I first shed tears as a wife. To Beatrice I leave the writing pad hidden within the wardrobe wall. To the woman I might have become had I never married, I leave my given name." You pause, then add, "And to no one, not even him, do I leave my silence." You enclose the letter in an envelope and press it flat beneath the hidden compartment of your drawer. It feels conclusive, but not melancholy. You now spend more time outdoors. You walk to the edge of Hyde Park and sit on the same bench, watching nurses attend to their young charges. Young couples stroll arm in arm, and elderly women scatter crumbs for pigeons as if feeding aspects of their former selves. Sometimes Clara joins you. She never inquires about your circumstances. She simply offers her company, and sometimes that is exactly what you require. A presence that asks for nothing, that does not reduce you to a prescribed function. You discuss poetry, legal reform, gloves and boots, and how winter inevitably seems to arrive with a hint of disdain. And then one day you ask her, "What do you anticipate happens to women like us?" She tilts her head. "We change the regulations, you smile, and if we fail to..." She shrugs. "Then we draft new ones for someone else to implement." You walk home alone that day, but your stride feels different, more self-determined. And when you encounter your husband in the hallway that evening, he says, "You have been absent frequently lately." You nod. "Yes, that is not typical." You pause. Then, with a slight smile, you say, "Neither am I." The telegraph arrives on a Tuesday. A pristine envelope, a smudge of ink, a single sentence. Your husband's mother has passed away. Immediate arrangements necessary. No feeling, no signature, just obligation, encased in telegram grey. You gaze at it for an extended moment, then fold it neatly and place it on the hall table where your husband will find it. You do not retrieve him. You do not attempt to soothe him. You simply allow the gravity of the news to await him, as so many burdens have awaited you. When he reads it, his expression hardens, not with genuine sadness, but with calculation. His mother was never malicious, but never affectionate. Their connection was ceremonial, not heartfelt. Still, the loss of a parent tends to reorganize one's inner landscape. He remains silent for hours, and then you will wear black. You assent. The funeral is restrained and somber, as anticipated. The chapel is filled with individuals more concerned with her social standing than her inner life. There are flowers, light-coloured gloves, tributes so practiced they resemble advertisements. You sit next to your husband and observe the slight tremor in his jaw. When the minister mentions devotion to family, he does not shed a tear. He does not seek your hand. Afterward, in the carriage, he states, "I suppose that is the end of it then." You reply, "For her, yes." He looks at you but does not argue. What neither of you articulates is what you're both considering. This is how it concludes. Respectable, solitary, and entirely predictable. That night, the house is heavy with quiet. You move through the drawing room alone, pausing by the cabinet where she once kept her embroidered cloths and aged photographs. You open a drawer, and there, to your quiet amazement, you find a writing pad, small, edges softened from use, secured with a ribbon. You carry it to your room and open it slowly, holding your breath. Lists, jottings, incomplete thoughts, pages filled with half-formed ideas and abandoned phrases. A line near the front reads, "I was once meant to be an opera singer. I still quietly hum when no one is listening." You turn another page. "My husband never asked if I was content. I never considered mentioning that I was not." You close the writing pad, and for the first time, you mourn. Not for your mother-in-law as you knew her, but for the person she was prevented from becoming. The young woman who dreamed of the stage, the wife who learned to suppress her distress, the widow who hummed when she believed the house was unoccupied. You weep quietly for her, for yourself, for the vast echoing heritage of women who were silenced, whose private journals outlasted their voices, and when the tears subside, you compose a new page in your own journal. She never escaped. But I will. The following day you wear your mourning attire like protective gear. You walk through the town with your back straight and your notebook folded beneath your arm. You pass the flower shop, the bakery, the post office, and then you pass a small girl, no older than 7, humming to herself while twirling in the street. You pause. She does not notice you, but you smile because she is not yet aware of the restrictions. And perhaps, just perhaps, you will contribute to rewriting them before she finds out. You return to the old residence on a dreary afternoon that carries the scent of metal and decay. Not your current home, but the one where you grew up. You have not visited it in years, not since before the wedding, before the promises, before everything. It is situated just beyond the city, nestled behind a bent iron gate and an unkempt hedge your mother could never bring herself to prune. The visit is intended to be brief, merely a formality. Your father has passed away, and your sister, who is now married and managing her own property, has requested your presence to sort through a few remaining items. "Come as soon as you can," she writes. "The new occupants require the keys by the end of the month." You step inside, and the air engulfs you like a memory. The smell of wood polish, dried lavender, old paper, and underneath it all, the faintest trace of something you cannot quite identify. Perhaps hope, or what remains of it. You walk slowly through the front entrance hall, your fingers lightly touching the railing. The wallpaper is peeling now. The wood groans more than it once did, but it is still here, the location where you first learned quiet. where you first practiced good manners, where you first looked in the mirror and wondered, is this all there is? Upstairs, in the room that was once your childhood haven, the furniture is shrouded in white fabric. The vanity, the wardrobe, the bed frame that squeaked when you moved during the night, all are now spectral. Your sister has already collected most of the possessions, leaving you only a small carton marked in pencil, your things. You sit cross-legged on the floor and open it. Inside is a cracked mirrored compact, a faded hair ribbon, 3 postcards never mailed, and neatly wrapped in brown paper, a cluster of letters. Your letters, ones you wrote and never sent, to no specific recipient, perhaps to yourself, perhaps to the life you once envisioned. You immediately recognize your penmanship. Softer, then more expansive. The ink in some is smudged, marked by old tears. In one you wrote, "If I mature and forget how to feel, please remind me who I was when I believed that words could rescue me." You sit very still and realize you never completely forgot. But you did suppress her. The girl who composed these letters, the one who walked barefoot in the garden and said no just to experience the sensation. The one who improvised songs and whispered secrets to the breeze and once called out at the dinner table, "Why must everything be so subdued?" You owe her something. You read every letter, all 12 of them. Each one fractures the defences you spent years constructing. By the time the light begins to dim, you are transformed. Not renewed, not healed, but reconnected. And for the first time in years, you take up a writing instrument. Not your elegant fountain pen, but an old one from the box, with ink that blots and a damaged tip. You write a new letter, addressed to her. To you. I thought I abandoned you, but you waited. You always knew I would return. I did not survive what I endured merely to forget who I was before the restrictive clothes and the formal agreements. I will not lose you again. You seal the letter and tuck it into your coat. The house murmurs softly behind you as you descend the stairs, and just before you exit you speak out loud to no one. I remember now, you return to London with the wind beneath your coat and dust on your sleeves. There is a newfound honesty in your stride, not faster, not louder, but more certain. You walk as if you are no longer borrowing your existence from another person. Clara is the first to notice. She meets you at the corner cafe, your unofficial sanctuary, tucked alongside a row of bookstores where the coffee is weak but the seclusion is profound. "You are different," she says, before you have even settled into your chair. "I remembered," you respond, raising an eyebrow. "Ah," she smiles, "that is more perilous than simply changing." You genuinely smile, the kind that illuminates your eyes as the cups touch and the light filters through the dusty window panes. You share with her the story of the letters, of the girl you once were, of how your silence was never truly empty. It was merely waiting. "Do you think it is too late to live differently?" you ask. Clara does not answer immediately. She raises her teacup, observes you carefully, then says, "Darling, we are Victorian women. Everything is too late and we proceed regardless." You laugh loudly enough that a gentleman 2 tables away glances over, and for once you do not lower your voice. Back home, your husband also senses the change. You no longer ask permission before taking the carriage. You host your own guests, mostly women, some unmarried, some controversial, some both. You begin drafting essays, brief pointed pieces that challenge the sacredness of certain domestic practices. You publish one under a false identity, Mrs. A.E. Finch, a name as imaginary as the independence it is gradually establishing. He only confronts you once. What exactly are you doing? You look up from your desk. Living. He scoffs. At my expense. You smile, weary, composed. At mine. The discussion does not continue. He exits abruptly, slamming the door, and you, rather than flinching, complete your paragraph. That week, a widow you barely know sends you a letter in gentle grey ink. Your writing reminded me of myself. I had not heard my own inner voice in years. Thank you. You cry upon reading it, not from sorrow, but from affirmation, because this is how real change begins. Not in large-scale uprisings or formal announcements, but in hushed conversations passed from one woman to another like a flickering flame in a dark hallway. You begin attending public lectures, examining legal precedents, studying the names of reformers, suffragists and critics. You commit the date of the Married Women's Property Act to memory. You speak it aloud, like a hopeful chant. 1870, 1882, 1893. Milestones etched in ink and effort. And throughout this time, the house grows more unfamiliar. Not worse, not unkind, just increasingly insignificant. A symbol of a life to which you are no longer bound. One evening, as you walk the long passage past the drawing room, you catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror. Not the composed wife, not the disappointed daughter, not the phantom. You see someone new now, someone emerging, and you whisper without any formality, "Welcome back." The envelope arrives with no sender information, only your name written in an unfamiliar hand. Inside, an invitation. Cream-coloured paper, an embossed border. No signature. But the message announces a gathering of women. No spouses, no social rankings, no need for excuses. You hesitate. It could be anything, a setup, a practical joke, a well-meaning relative's misguided idea. But something inside you stirs, a recognition, a spark. So you go. It is held in a townhouse in Bloomsbury, unassuming, covered in ivy, smelling of books, the kind of place that appears to have absorbed a century of hushed conversations. You knock once. The door opens. A young woman, freckled, alert-eyed, greets you without any fuss. She offers no title, just your name. You are expected. She guides you upstairs to a reception room filled with warm lighting and comfortable worn chairs. There are a dozen women already present, some older, in high-necked blouses and plain dresses, some young, hair loose, laughter easy. All of them appear alert, as if they have stepped out of a dream and onto their own stage. No one asks your surname, no one asks whose spouse you are. Instead they ask, what project are you currently working on? Not what is your occupation, not where do you reside, but what are you creating with your life? You reply, essays on female identity, on autonomy. One woman nods, another smiles, a third leans forward and says, good, we need more of those. The meeting commences without ceremony. No gavel, no formal opening, just shared tea and sharp intellect. They discuss laws, both old and recent, birth control methods, pamphlets being secretly printed, a woman who lost custody of her child in court because her husband claimed her temperament was inappropriate, a working-class mother apprehended for distributing informational materials about menstruation. Your throat tightens. These are not remote misfortunes. These are echoes of your own experience, presented in different forms. You speak, initially tentatively, then with greater assurance. You tell them about the writing pad, the letters, the inheritance of silence passed down like family jewels. They listen, and when you conclude, an older woman, hair intricately braided like a crown, reaches across the space between the armchairs and places a hand on yours. You have passed through the fire, she says. You laugh softly, not undamaged. She gently squeezes your fingers, but with the means to start a fire still in your possession. That evening you walk home in the dark, your notebook held close. The gas lights flicker. A horse-drawn cart clatters past. Somewhere a man is yelling about a missing scarf. Life proceeds. But you feel suspended, as if someone has raised the sky just enough to allow you to breathe. You lie awake in bed for hours, gazing at the ceiling. Your husband shifts beside you but does not awaken. You turn to the wall and whisper, "There are more of us." And in the quiet, the shadows no longer feel lonely. They feel inhabited, The second meeting feels less like an event and more like a return home. You arrive earlier this time, offering to assist with arranging seating, pouring tea, aligning the piles of flyers on the window ledge. A young woman with ink-stained fingers thanks you shyly. She has been running off copies of The Married Woman's Guide to Legal Personhood. The title alone makes you smile. Conversations proliferate like growing vines. One woman is organising support for teenage factory workers enduring 16-hour shifts. Another is writing a newspaper column under the name Mrs. Nobody. A third, quiet, middle-aged, previously submissive, has started instructing wives on how to open private accounts at discreet banks. None of it is strictly against the law, but all of it is unexpected. That is where the power lies. That is the risk. And you bring your own pages, the ones you have written late into the night, by lamplight that wavers when the wind presses hard against the windows. You read them aloud, hesitant at first, your voice strained from disuse, but the room sustains you like a deep breath. You write about the experience of being in a marriage and feeling ignored, of hosting dinner parties and wondering if anyone present has read a book written by a woman, of wearing black not for mourning but for concealment, of surviving not because you were inherently brave but because you were exceedingly cautious. When you stop reading, the room is silent. Then a woman in the corner, with streaks of white in her hair, says softly, "That is precisely what I could never find the language for," and you realise this is more than just emotional release. It is a fundamental plan. Later, as you assist with washing teacups in the small kitchen, the hostess leans in close. "You know," she murmurs, "these walls are not as soundproof as we would prefer." The neighbour reports that her husband has been making inquiries. You pause. What does that imply? She shrugs, composed. It simply means we need to relocate. And just like that, this quiet movement packs itself into boxes, into shoulder bags, into writing pads. You are given a small piece of paper before you depart. New location next Wednesday. Same time, a different perspective. Adaptation replaces panic. This is the constant action of women to shape themselves like water flowing around an obstacle. When one avenue is closed, they clear a path through the brush, and if even that is blocked, they show their daughters how to hide a flame within their skirts. That night you put pen to paper once more, but this time the words are not recollection, they are directions. You plot out essays, future addresses. You outline a possible series, collecting impressions from the drawing room, real women's narratives disguised as fiction, bypassing the scrutiny like a subtle verse. And on the last pages you address your mother-in-law a second time, not with sadness, but with welcome. There are seats here you never had the chance to use, but I will save one for you in case your spirit should ever find its way to this house. You fold the sheet, placing it behind her old looking-glass in the front room. Then you extinguish the light and dream not of liberty but of continuity, of generations of women joining strength across the decades, whispering truths through the wall coverings and the fine linens and the rising tea vapour. You have always known how to keep a perfect household, but now you start to wonder, what if a household could also feel honest? It begins with small adjustments. The draperies in the sitting room, those heavy brocade horrors selected by your husband's mother, are removed. You put up delicate muslin instead, inviting the sunlight in, unobstructed and plain. The parlour carpet is exchanged for one you purchased at a Women's Aid event. It carries the scent of cardamom and has a mark in one spot, yet its colours are vibrant. And the literature you bring in, books by the dozen, some composed by women under names like Currer Bell or George Eliot, others, more radical, circulated discreetly among the suffragist lecturers, titles your husband would disapprove of, titles your father would dismiss. But they now stand on your shelves, their spines facing outward with certainty. Your husband registers the change naturally. He walks in one night and stops in the entrance, his attention caught by a book titled The Subjection of Women. "Is this what occupies our reading time now?" he asks, his voice sharp. You settle the book down gently. "Yes," You respond, nothing further, but the air around you grows taut. The following morning he eats breakfast silently. No newspaper, no remark on the jam, only the scraping sound of a knife on toast, too loud for the early hour. But you do not withdraw because you have absorbed lessons from the women with the stained fingers and temporary addresses. Defiance is not always loud. Sometimes it is a detail in the decor. Sometimes it is the volume on the small table, the curtain moving in the air current, the flyer hidden inside a cookbook. The way you no longer rise when he enters the space, not as an act of defiance, but because you were already fully engaged with your work. It is not an outright conflict, yet it is not submission either. It is something nascent, and in this developing domain you start to write with purpose. Your essays gain intensity, you now challenge the marriage statutes directly. You detail the ways women are trapped in agreements they cannot void, the way custody of children is automatically given to the father in court, the way honour is always tied to obedience and never to self-respect. You understand the danger. You have witnessed what happens to women branded as troublesome, unstable, unfeminine. But the instrument in your grip no longer wavers because you have remembered that your writing extends beyond yourself. You are writing for the young girl in the attic who writes notes between her chores, for the woman in the countryside who reads by the flame while her spouse sleeps heavily, for the widow who is finally independent but does not know how to reclaim her identity. And slowly, like climbing vine on brickwork, your prose begins to circulate. You hear your own phrasing repeated in other homes, voiced by other people. You notice a line of yours scrawled on a pamphlet you did not compose. And then, one day, a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, approaches you at the grocer's, her eyes wide. "Are you Mrs. A.E. Finch?" You pause, offer a slight smile, and confirm, "Yes, but only because it offers a shield." She smiles brightly. "Thank you." You watch her depart, her hair ribbon straight, her posture upright, and you understand this is the feeling when the written page creates an opening. The foundational walls of your residence have not crumbled, but they have shifted subtly, like the settling of aged stone when no one is observing. And in the quiet space between your husband's questions and your restraint, a new certainty has established itself. He is not malicious, but he is inflexible, which in this time is almost identical. You fully grasp this one evening as you are reading silently by the fireplace, and he clears his throat in that calculated way that introduces a mandate presented as a conversation. "I have accepted an invitation," he states. You raise your eyes, calm and steady, to address the merchant society regarding order, about the essential importance of stability within the household. Your breathing stops. "Do you mean compliance?" you inquire. His mouth twitches, falling short of a smile. "I mean respect, which your actions have recently seemed to forget." He selects his words carefully, avoiding direct accusations. Nothing that would disrupt a dinner party. But in his tone is the same coldness you once heard in your father's voice, that silent intimidation. Be agreeable or face consequence. You close your book. You are free to speak, you reply, but so am I. That secures his attention. You inform him you have been invited to contribute to a reading at a women's gathering place. You do not seek permission. You state it as simple fact. He lets out a short, cold laugh. "Do they know your husband's reputation?" You offer a faint smile. "They know who I am." He stares for a time, debating whether to press the issue further. But you have changed the parameters without consultation, and he no longer recognizes the terms of engagement. He leaves the area, and you breathe. The evening of the reading, your hands are steady. You wear your most simple dress, your oldest shawl, your mother-in-law's pin turned inward, so its gleam is visible only to you. The hall is modest, filled with varied seating and purposeful expressions. You speak about domestic turmoil and unseen constraints. You read selections from your writings, your correspondence, even that old diary from your youth, the one with ink smears and worn edges. You speak plainly, softly, and still. The room is silent when you conclude, the valuable kind of silence, the kind that retains everything. Afterward, a woman grasps your hand and whispers, "You voiced what I was too timid to acknowledge." You walk home alone beneath the gas lamps, your notebook held close to your chest. The fog swirls around your shoes, and you do not rush. You have grown to cherish these walks, the sound of your own pace, the way your breath forms temporary shapes in the cold air. At home, he is already sleeping, or appearing to be. You undress slowly, fold your clothes neatly, drape your shawl over the back of the chair. Then you get into bed next to him and face the wall. Your thoughts circulate, not with anger, not with fear, just awake. And deep within, you grasp something profound. You are no longer waiting, not for him to change, not for the law to acknowledge, not for the authority to intervene. You are already becoming the self your correspondents always hoped you would be. You awaken to a letter slipped beneath your door. The paper is heavy, the ink slightly blurred. It is unsigned again, but recognizable, a brief message. The magistrate has started to watch the Bloomsbury assemblies. A change is required. A more secluded spot has been located. We will meet in the glass house behind the printing press, through the narrow passage, past the red window coverings, and then below it, a quotation in ornate script. The strongest bonds are the ones women forget they are wearing. You sit for a prolonged moment at your desk, the note in your lap, the morning illumination spilling through the muslin curtains like sweet liquid. Your house is peaceful. Your husband has gone for the day. Outside, a carriage moves past, its metal wheels clattering over the cobblestones as if nothing has been altered. But everything has. Your writing surface is covered now with drafts, some optimistic, others passionate. Potential titles in your mind. Why the Nursery is Not a Prison, On Choosing Solitude Over Silence, The Ghosts of Obedience, A Woman's Inheritance, each one originating from your experiences, your residence, your own formerly quiet voice. You put on your most unremarkable garments, the ones no one pays attention to, and proceed to the narrow passage behind the printing press. The glass house is concealed by uncontrolled ivy, its glass cloudy with the marks of previous occupants. Inside, women, dozens of them, some from the Bloomsbury days, others new to the group. A lively group. They converse in low tones, laugh with enthusiasm, weep without shame. There is an infant sleeping in a basket next to the seat of a woman who once sued for custody and succeeded. A rarity so exceptional it became a legend. There are pastries and amateur drawings of proposed banners. There is a young woman of only 16 reading Wollstonecraft aloud as if it were a prayer. You exhale and join them. No one asks about your absence. No one needs to, because you communicate it in your stance now, the way your shoulders no longer curve inward, the way you listen without hesitation. Someone hands you a stack of leaflets. Distribute discreetly, they whisper. You conceal them inside your coat, beneath the lining you once stitched for handkerchiefs and fragrant packets of herbs. Now it contains truth. That night you return home and write intensely, a piece titled The Beautiful, a personal narrative of Victorian marriage. It is not charitable, it is not harsh, it is factual. You describe the ritual of perfection, the way women turn into decorative objects, quiet, flawless, arranged for show. You discuss the overwhelming compliments, the strategically placed flattery, the reverence for a wife's submission. You write about how loneliness can persist even when your schedule is full of guests and fine clothes and graceful dances, and you do not submit it anonymously. For the first time, you sign your own name, not Mrs. A. Finch, not a concerned lady, but your real, living, difficult name. The next morning you mail it to a progressive periodical published out of Manchester. You acknowledge the consequences. You know the reaction will come in disapproving looks, narrowed eyes at dinner gatherings, rumours in the drawing rooms, perhaps worse. But you have already lived with silence. Now you choose to speak, and in that decision, something is freed. The piece circulates more quickly than you dared hope, and more slowly than you wanted. It appears initially in the back sections of the Northern Women's Quarterly, placed between a feature on unfair wages in the textile factories and a poem about metal hairpins. But the ideas find their audience. They always do. A governess in Sussex writes to the editor, quoting your statement about the demonstration of wifeliness as a vocation, not a mutual alliance. A midwife in Liverpool gives a copy to every mother she visits. A young widow in Bath sends you a pressed flower and a word of thanks, although she signs only with her initials. And then comes the message you never anticipated, from your sister, your reserved, compliant sister. She writes simply, "I read your piece. I wept, not out of anger, but because I recognise my own self in every single line." You fold that paper repeatedly until the edges become worn. You remember your mother-in-law's mirror, where you once concealed your ambitions. You look into it now and see a person who stands firm. Your husband does not mention the writing, but one evening you see him pausing in the doorway of your study, his eyes reviewing your bookshelves, your pages, your existence now so openly displayed. "You are changed," he observes finally. "You put down your pen?" "No, just visible." He nods once and walks away. That night you sleep with the windows open, allowing in a breeze that carries the scent of coal smoke and flower blossoms. You dream of an older woman in a grey covering, standing at a printing machine. Her hands are stained. Her expression is serious, but her eyes show confidence. You wake up suddenly and realise she was you, years in the future, still striving, still writing, still handing the light to the next. And even though you know the laws have not yet changed, the judicial system remains biased against women, and the world still rewards quiet acceptance. Something is fracturing, not with a loud noise, not clearly visible, but deep within the essential structure of society. You hear it in the gentle sound of your essays being recited in concealed parlours. You feel it in the girl who has the courage to refuse without hesitation. You taste it in the words that once trembled and now resonate like striking metal. And so you write one final page for the notebook that was never intended for publication. If one woman can see her situation more clearly because I articulated this then, the silence was never valuable. It was simply convenient. You close the notebook, place it on the shelf with the others, and walk to the window just as the sun begins to rise. No longer trapped, no longer waiting, just aware. You reach the end, friend. Now take a long breath. Let the concluding scenes settle like particles in a quiet space. The muslin window coverings rising with the air, the noise of carriage movement fading into the distance, the movement of paper under a resolute hand. You have journeyed through drawing rooms and court hearings, private parlour secrets, and public leaflet rebellions. You have listened to women whisper with imagination behind closed doors and proclaim loudly beneath the streetlights, each one drawing back the rich coverings of Victorian marriage to allow the light in. And you were present with them. You felt the restriction of the corset not only on the body but on the spirit. You experienced the unpleasant taste of submission served with afternoon tea. You witnessed the profound change not through fire and banners but through written words, gazes, decisions, hesitations. Tonight, perhaps your own quiet moments feel somewhat different. Perhaps you now carry something, a question, an inspiration, a memory of someone who might have also written had she been permitted. Let that be your keepsake from this narrative. And if your eyes are still open, just barely, let them close. Now, envision. Smooth paper, warm hands, a gently burning fire, and ideas exchanged from person to person like necessary nourishment. Security in secrecy. The world is still. And somewhere, in a room illuminated by a single light, another woman begins to write.